Hello and welcome to the Functionally Enlightened podcast with Dr. Sharon Sarita. We interview well-respected medical and functional practitioners, as well as patients who have overcome disabling chronic conditions, such as dysautonomia, and reclaimed their health. These enlightened guests provide helpful tips on managing chronic pain and illnesses, using a combination of traditional and whole-body healing modalities. If you're interested in natural healing and quality of life improvement, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening to today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Functionally Enlightened podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sharon Sarita, and today we have a very special guest. She shares a sort of similar background, so I'm really excited to get to hear from her. Natalie Earl is a functional nutritionist and gut health specialist who helps women reverse chronic conditions of all types by addressing the root causes. She starts with gut and nervous system work as part of a pivotal track that she makes her clients go through for foundational pieces of healing. Her journey into the world of functional medicine began after battling a series of complex health issues herself, including severe eczema and PMS, chronic fatigue, even candida and autoimmune symptoms, which conventional medicine really couldn't help explain or resolve. So we see this often in our chronic illness community. But what's key here, she has a background in physics, so similar to my engineering background, and she brings a systems-based approach to healing. But she specializes again with clients that have these complex conditions, including dysautonomia, autoimmune symptoms or flares of all types, hormonal imbalances, and the microbiome dysfunction. Her practice, Nutrition with Confidence, blends science-backed protocols with nervous system regulation for sustainable and bio-individual healing plans. So Natalie, we thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I really to be here.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about the background. Some people, our audience knows how I transitioned from environmental engineering, but how does a person go from physics to nutrition?
Absolutely. Well, so interestingly, when I went to undergrad, in my freshman year, I was actually enrolled in pre-med. So I had always been interested in medicine and was considering going that route. I remember sitting in my first math class, though, it was a prerequisite that I had to do for pre-med, and it was so boring to me. I'm a little bit of a nerd in that. So I decided to change my undergrad because I wanted to actually enjoy more of the mathematical challenge. And I really have always appreciated math, and I took physics in high school, and my physics teacher was the coolest person ever. And I just really admired his way of living in this world and the understandings that physics can bring in so many different, in the macros, sphere of how we can calculate and predict how nature is going to work for us, and also in the micro. So it was really applicable in so many different areas that expanded my way of thinking about new ideas and how to connect, like how does this new idea work for a totally different field. And so yeah, so it was very inspiring, learning from my physics teacher in high school. And I was like, why not? I'll just go that route as well. So it kind of pushed me into that. And I didn't really fully understand how I was going to integrate in my future. I thought I would become an educator, getting into, I wanted to pursue more education, more research. I did research in my undergrad, and I was very, very interested in environmental engineering as well. I cared a ton about the environment, and I still do. And it's interesting how that's actually overlapped now with how I get to communicate with my clients. My mission at Nutrition with Confidence is to reconnect individuals to their body, but also to their local community and their environment. And I think that you cannot have the health of the whole being, your whole body, without the connection to your community and also the environment around us. So I integrate, teaching my clients about where to get their food from and regenerative agriculture. And that's a big piece too, really nourishing ourselves too. So,
Oh.
yeah.
I'm glad that you did bring that up, but just to rewind a little bit, how I see the interplay between physics and nutrition, and I hadn't thought about it until speaking to you, but I know in physics, I don't remember the numeric system, like 1048 or 1058, we learn about the static world, and then in the subsequent classes, we learn about the dynamic part of it, dynamic engineering. And I'm thinking with nutrition, with the human body, with the environment that we're exposed to, that is very dynamic and fluid. So I can see how you kind of mesh those two worlds together, and it's pretty cool, pretty interesting. So that being said, you're doing physics, and I know that you encountered some of your own health hardships. Is that what really kind of turned the tide for you, or was there something in between there?
Absolutely. I was really burnout after undergrad. I really pushed myself hard to get really good grades and also have a, a social life. So so I was trying to do it all. And so after undergrad, my health really took, it's one of those experiences I think most college students experience when you are pulling all-nighters in college and you're pushing through finals week and you're in, cortisol is high. And I didn't know any of this at the time, but your cortisol is high and then everything ends and you just crash. Your immune system crashes, everything crashed. And so I realized like I need to take I actually need to take a break from going, straight into grad school. And during that time, I explored, I was dealing with my own health issues. I had severe PMS, debilitating cramps. It was so badly, so painful. Actually, it was from the start of getting my cycle in high school. I had dealt with this and irregular cycles as well, throughout college, but it was very painful, so much that I would try to be holistic and healthy and like not lean on ibuprofen, but I would, wait to the last minute, and it would be so bad that I was just like crawling through like the aisles in the CVS trying to get to the ibuprofen, and I was in agony. But there were a whole host of other symptoms that were, I didn't connect until later on. I had anxiety, headaches, chronic headaches. I had cystic acne that flared interestingly, after getting the HPV vaccine before going to college. And I had a lot of gut issues, constipation, basically irritable bowel disease, syndrome. Mixed mostly, like diarrhea and the constipation. So just the long list of symptoms just kept piling up, dry skin, and I got connected with a holistic pharmacist, and I was working with her at her pharmacy. She sold herbs and supplements that were, standard process, like really high-end supplement lines. And I learned a lot from her. She did these amazing intakes with people, helping them with hormones. And I would just listen to, I wasn't, listen to everything that she would say to these clients and teaching them about nutrition. And she actually spurred on this major interest. I could not stop devouring information about nutrition after that. And it took me a while to finally figure out what was going on for me. But when I read Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride's The Gut and Psychology Syndrome, it was like an aha moment. It was like I was reading my whole life's experience, and everything. She simplified it so well. For someone, I also have experienced trauma as a kid, and so I had chalked up so much of my experience to PTSD, and something that I couldn't even control. It was just something I was going to have to deal with the rest of my life. And there's the adverse childhood experiences and connections with autoimmunity. I just thought that I was doomed in a lot of ways. And when I read her book, it was something that I could practically and simply integrate into my day to day and my lifestyle, and work on changing my gut microbiome to rebuild my body, my immune system, and get rid of the inflammation and the pain. So that's kind of what started me on my journey to actually, after that, after working with a functional nutrition therapy practitioner, I then was like, okay, I'm in. I've got to help. I was still considering naturopathic doctor at that point because I was so interested in health and connected that I really did want to work with people and care for people in this way, in this profession. Yeah, so that's kind of the first aha moment though for me was reading the GAPS book.
Okay, and that's a pretty detailed book. I know I have a copy of it. I've read through it. I need to revisit it because the foundational aspect of, I guess, ancestral eating is a big component there. So can you talk to us first off about your own journey and how you use those protocols, primarily the ancestral-based eating, and what other pillars you use to help your clients today?
Yeah. So in my own experience, in college I was actually vegetarian,
Oh,
and I thought I was doing everything right with my health, right? I was running marathons, I was pushing myself really hard, but was so deprived. I really struggled. And I had food sensitivities at the time. I had known about those food sensitivities in college. And it wasn't until after college that I found the GAPS protocol and worked with a practitioner, which is really ancestral based, which means that it's kind of like the paleo understanding of how did we evolve and what did we eat to evolve to really nourish ourselves. And I think it's fascinating that our guts, as we've evolved, the brain evolved or grew secondary to our digestive system, right? So our digestive system really is our first brain in a lot of ways. It's where a lot of the neurotransmitters are produced and all of our nutrition is derived and hormones are filtered and our immune system comes from. And so the I think like what I have realized in my own experiences, and so many of my clients too, have previously tried a vegetarian diet maybe or vegan diet, and they might have actually missed out on a lot of nutrition that was rebuilding themselves, right? So the animal-based foods that have helped our digestive system and our brains evolve and our immune systems evolve, those are the building foods, and they are foundational to our nutrition. And then the plant foods are really also necessary, I think, in very specific scenarios and in strategic ways that we can use plant foods, especially for me. And what worked for me was actually cutting out a lot of the raw vegetables. I was almost dabbling at one point. I lived in Hawaii and I was dabbling in like raw vegan and eating a lot of raw foods, and it just destroyed my digestion. So when we look at our digestive system and how we've evolved, our stomach is primarily mostly used to digest our protein, right? And then we have a small intestine and large intestine that is compared to a ruminant not as big, right? So the ruminants, they are meant to eat a lot of plant foods and raw plant foods. But for humans, our digestion really it doesn't do well with so many plant foods, right? And I actually experienced that, and a lot of my clients have experienced that too. So when we are rebuilding our bodies after the aftermath of all this damage done to our gut microbiomes, we really prioritize the animal-based foods. Any kind of animal proteins are allowed or whatever's tolerated, and then a lot of the healthy animal fats as well, because they really support the immune system. The immune system's really built on a lot of fats, and so is the nervous system. And it also, those nutrients that we actually get from the fats from animals, like vitamin A, D, E, and K, we don't get those from, olive oil or from different, seed oils and things like that. Those are well, not the olive oil. Olive oil is not a Franken oil, but those seed oils like canola oil, sunflower oil, um, safflower oil, and the like are very, very toxic and don't have nutrient value, really. So those are kind of the foundations of what really got me out. Also, what I like to teach my clients are the four cornerstone foods to gut healing. So, like we've been talking about the animal-based proteins and including like nose to tail, it's the whole animal. So, organ meats, especially, those are the superfoods of the entire world, right? So, that is a major staple. And then the meat stock, as part of that, is the cornerstone food that actually seals up the gut lining, provides a lot of the amino acids that are needed to help regrow the microvilli in our intestines.
Mm-hmm.
So that food is like the staple food of the GAPS protocol. I think some people, read that book and it's confusing because Dr. Natasha is so wise. She puts so much information in there. And to simplify it, it's just these four cornerstone foods. You want to make sure these are in. And then the fermented foods are also a cornerstone, right? So every culture has these. You've got, sauerkraut, there's yogurts, there's kimchi, there's all these different bikavas, like so many different cultured foods. And what I love to teach is with my clients, like this is really ancestral. Before colonialization and it's stripping away of culture, each human group and indigenous group has their own kind of culture, and that's coming from their food, right? And that's beautiful. That's what we love about food, really. And unfortunately in America, we don't have, we have like mustard and ketchup, that condiments that are like sugar based and not super, our yogurt even that we purchase in stores it's not as high potency with the probiotics and the cultures of probiotics that we would actually get traditionally from a properly prepared or like ancestrally prepared yogurt or kefir, right? So fermented foods are a second cornerstone there. And then the third cornerstone is the non-starchy vegetables. So this is actually where if you just focus on what to eat, right? You have the non-starchy vegetables, and your gut bugs are going to love all the starchy. They want those. You miss out on those for a short period of time on a gut healing protocol. But the amazing thing is you're changing the ecosystem of your gut bacteria so much that you don't end up desiring those anymore, right? So, and then when we add them back in, they're not to be gone forever. We add some of those starchy things back in to help feed good bacteria, but it has to be at a strategic time, right? And then the fourth cornerstone food is so we said meat stock, non-starchy vegetables, fermented foods, and it's the organ meats. So we already talked about that one.
Yes. So the organ meats is one that I find problematic in getting people to buy into, including them as like a daily staple, even in the smallest amount. So what are some of the tips that you have for your clients so that they can integrate that? And what about the amount that they should be including in their diets?
Yeah, so the first way I have people get it in is to mix it into a ground meat like mixture. So you do some people will have a hard time doing this themselves though. So if they're EBGB about it, I'll give them a brand. So Force of Nature is a really good brand that does this. And there's a lot of other great brands now that I think do that. So I'll have people try that first. And then as a last resort, I will have people just do supplements of the organs. But typically I have all these recipes that I can get people to do. So heart is the first that I have people try to make. But I also use very strategic, these organs very strategically for specific cases. So for my histamine clients, we have them take the raw kidney while it's frozen, and we have them chop it into like little swallowable pieces.
Hmm.
And these are little kidney pills. And we'll do 1 to 2 ounces a day because it's a really good high source of DAO enzyme, which is going to help clear the body of the excess histamine. And it's also high in B5 and a lot of the other nutrients that your body would use to make its own DAO. So I like using these organs because it's synergistic with the system. If we are trying to treat someone with histamines, we don't want to just give them the band-aid of DAO supplements. Like, let's get to the root of why their body isn't making that DAO enzyme. And often it's nutrient deficiencies like B5. So it's really cool to kind of hit two birds with one stone there, and you're getting at the root of it, but you're also getting symptom management with nutrition, of course.
Yes, absolutely. And with that, you mentioned everything is bioavailable in these organ meats and in just meat in general. However, you do work with highly sensitive people as well as people who might have intolerances, maybe to specific food groups. If they've done a food sensitivity test, that might be shown as a hidden stressor. So something that they might not have seen a reaction immediately after eating, but they know that it's kind of triggering an immune response. But with those other things you mentioned, like histamines, and you've already talked a little bit about some of the vegetables maybe being more of an anti-nutrient than nutrients that we're led to. So can you give us some examples of how you would work with people with those food sensitivities and then go into detail with some of the other non-animal products?
Right. Yeah. So when I see people with food sensitivities, I am looking at uh, I'm looking at a person's body whose immune system is overactive, right? So, and this is all Hippocrates says this, that all of our diseases, all of our symptoms come from the gut microbiome here. So this is what's causing that overactivity of the immune system is really actually the leaky gut. And so we actually focus on food sensitivities and try to cut those out. We're missing the mark, right? We're not actually addressing the root cause, which is healing and sealing the lining of the gut. So I've actually, I don't run those food sensitivity tests anymore because I already know people are reacting to a lot of things. When they come to me with autoimmunity or symptoms, I'm like, of course, you're reacting to a lot of foods. So we have a strategy. It's just a very simple strategy of focusing on the most tolerated foods, which tend to be animal foods. A lot less people have reactions to these animal foods, which is with the immune system, interestingly. So when it comes to plant foods and grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, those kinds of things, you'll often see more, and dairy, I guess, and eggs, I guess, can be common triggers. So we really narrow down the diet at first, kind of like an elimination diet, but it's so different because when we add things back in after a month of doing soft cooked foods that are high, have these four cornerstone food groups, the meat stock, the organ meats, all those things in, that we are regrowing the intestines. So by that 30 days, when we're adding foods in, we're not looking to see, oh, what is the actual sensitivity? We're actually looking at, oh, how resilient is the intestinal lining now? And if it's not, if you have a reaction to a food, adding it back in, we want to first give it a few days, actually, because the body is so intelligent. And if we stop eating certain food groups, the body's going to stop making those enzymes to break it down. So we want to give, when we try to add something back in, we want to give it a few, 3 to 4 days before saying, okay, yeah, my body is really reacting to this. Unless it's a very severe reaction, of course. I always tell my clients, like, the first day, if you have a violent reaction, please do not keep eating this food. But most of the time, it's like, oh, I think I had a little bit change in my stool. I think there was a little bit different. I felt like I had a little different anxiety that day or something. But then like day 2 or 3 or 4, it goes away. There's no problems there. So if that's the case for certain foods, especially therapeutic foods that are nutrient dense, like eggs or fermented dairy, I find, hey, let's keep those in a little bit longer if you are tolerating it. Tolerating is really case by case. Each person has to make that decision for themselves. Um, And when we do dairy, it's very specific dairy that is less inflammatory. So it's A2 dairy that's typically hopefully raw and doesn't have that inflammatory potential for the person. And after the 30 days of gut healing, a lot of those antibodies are not going to be able to attack the food because the food's not getting into the bloodstream anymore, right? So that's the main focus of kind of getting over those food sensitivities. But I will say there's also foods so earlier when I talked about the starches, that is, if people are reacting to starchy foods, that is more of a gut microbiome imbalance and not necessarily an immune reaction to that kind of food. But there are, like you said, different plant toxins that they can damage our body's gut and also create inflammation in other tissues of our body. So for a major group of any person with autoimmunity should be aware of lectins. I think the lectin plant toxin is a protein that the most commonly known one is gluten, right? Gluten is a lectin. And there are a lot of different other types of proteins in the lectin category. And those lectins are also found in nightshade vegetables and, a lot of different, they're also found in the seeds and the skins of a squash, and also in unripe fruit, right? So the importance of eating local, seasonally becomes a lot more clear as to why we really need to do this to avoid extra toxicity when our body's already dealing with a lot of toxicity. But those lectins are quite problematic to the digestive system, and people will not often have like an immediate reaction to those foods. It's more of a it builds up. The inflammation builds up over time, and it's kind of like that bucket of, how full is your bucket yet? Is
Right.
it, some people can get away with having a tomato here and there and don't really react. But if you're eating tomatoes and potatoes and all the nightshade foods all at once, and you're having a lot of stress, and you're also drinking a lot of coffee, and you're not sleeping well, you're going to have reactions to those foods. And you might not even know that it's that food because you're eating it all the time, right? And the body's homeostasis kind of quiets that noise. And so those types of reactions are different than immune reactions, but still it's actually mechanistic, right? With our body is how those proteins are damaging our gut lining.
Natalie, you brought up a good point about that toxin bucket. We talk about that often, and just the fact that you're nourishing your clients with the right types of foods to rebuild the gut, and you're eliminating those that might be problematic, like the lectins, which are, known to pierce the gut lining. So when you're going about bringing back foods in, are there any foods that you specifically say they are off the table?
Yeah, for 2 years, the foods that are going to be off the table are refined sugars and the grains and legumes, which are the really starchy, and potatoes, like starchy foods. And these what kind of denotes what's starchy and what's not starchy, people get hung up on. It's really bio-individual for some people. Like some of my really serious clients who have very serious neurological symptoms or maybe even mold toxicity, they have so much yeast in their body or so much of an imbalance of bacteria still that for even 6 months or up to a year, maybe longer, they will still react to something like a carrot, the starch from a carrot, which is really not starchy. The concept of the starches feeding bacteria comes from the specific carbohydrate diet. And this is just looking at the different chains, the length of the chains. And we do know from nutrition studies have classified different carbohydrates as a disaccharide, or which means two sugars connected, or monosaccharide, which is one, And then there's the polysaccharides, which is the many. Those are commonly supported and recommended by the standard American diet, to be like the slow burning carbs, right? Like those are your beans and legumes, and like the Mediterranean diet really emphasizes those foods, but they're problematic if the balance of bacteria is already off, right? Because it's true, those polysaccharides are really favorite food sources to feed bacteria. But we want to ask, what types of bacteria are you feeding, right? And if you have autoimmunity, if you have symptoms, it's not even likely. It's just a definite truth that there's an imbalance, because what we've know now from terrain theory is if you have enough of the good bacteria, they always keep in check all of those more opportunistic, quote unquote, bad bacteria. They're not necessarily all bad, but we don't want them overgrown. And if there's not a good balance and we're eating all those starches, we're feeding those guys too,
Right.
So.
And there are PCR tests that we use nowadays. They're becoming more and more sophisticated, although it's more of a transient test, right? You're catching stool within whatever the motility is of that individual person. So it could be between 12 hours and 36 hours, or maybe even more. People are definitely dealing with constipation. But it does provide helpful information in terms of that bacterial overgrowth. Like you mentioned, you can make the inference that maybe SIBO is a problem, or maybe you don't have enough of those butyrate producers, which are so critical to that mucosal barrier. So that's something that I'm seeing. I work with a lot of implant injured people, and I'm doing this study where that is Faecalibacterium prodnitzii and Roseburia and Akkermansia, which are the three that I'm always seeing at least 80% of the submittals either below detectable limits or very low. So we do see that happening. And then with the opportunistic guys, what you just mentioned, like you're seeing overgrowth of these guys. And so there needs to be a huge shift in the diet. It's going to be bio-individual. But I think with those 4 foundations that you were talking about, the staples that need to be in there, especially the broth, like I do broth with at least 2 of my meals every day still, and it's been like 3 years.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the thing about these cornerstone foods is these are cornerstone foods for gut healing, but they're also for gut maintenance, right? So we should always be eating these cornerstone foods. I hands down believe that this is how humans have eaten for centuries. And yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and people do pivot. I didn't think I would enjoy the diet as long as I've been doing it. If you look at it in terms of the number of ingredients, I'm still in a safe ballpark area of maybe 50 to 60 total ingredients that I'm kind of rotating around. But my gut likes it, and I don't have any kind of cravings for any type of grain, no sugars. I use stevia for my coffee, my one-a-day coffee. But do you notice this with the clients and with yourself even? Do you have like cravings that kind of go away?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I always say on these, podcasts and things like that, I'm parroting what I've learned from like the giants, in the field and Dr. Natasha, but we are more bacteria than we are human, right? So what our bacteria are craving and wanting to eat, it tells us, and they will send signals through the vagus nerve to the brain. They take over. So people who have that, and I was a sugar addict before. Like like I said, I was dealing with all my symptoms and in college, and I actually got diagnosed with pre-diabetes. But I was running marathons. I was thin. I was just protein deprived, and my blood sugar was all over the place.
Right.
So it made a lot of sense. But those is really because of the bacteria. The bacteria in my body were craving sugar, and that's what I was feeding them. Yeah, I was feeding them fruit. I actually didn't eat a lot of refined sugar because it interestingly showed up on my food sensitivity test. Like cane sugar was like a food sensitivity. And so I would rarely actually eat cane sugar, but I ate all the other, healthy sugars out there, which that is something that we all have to look at is if we're not focusing on what to eat, those bacteria are going to take over and often find the the crutch for us in those healthy diets. I dealt with that so much. I was on and off the GAPS diet for years before I fully committed to the 2-year process. And that was when I was more stable emotionally, I think, and also I had more support with me. Like I had different practitioners who were helping me along that path, and I needed that accountability, right? So I got off on a tangent.
No, I think that's perfect. And I love that you said you were on and off the diet, but every time you revisited it, you were doing something good for your body. So it was like incremental. And sometimes that's where people have to be met at because they're not ready or they don't, yeah, they're just not ready to fully commit to saying, hey, no gluten at all, no grains at all.
Yes, yes, exactly. So I had committed, and I still commit to this every year, even after the 2 years that I did. Like every year, I do a whole month of the GAPS intro soups again to
Yes.
it's my way of maintenance, and I'll do it once or twice a year sometimes. And it's therapeutic. So it's so therapeutic, and it's almost a ceremony and practice of like returning back to like these really are ancestral wisdoms that guide us, and I get so much from it every year. And so, yeah, the cravings have totally gone away. After those 2 years, I can now eat actually like a sourdough piece of bread, or I've had sugar, and I don't have that hook of like I have to keep eating it. I feel
Mhm.
so much more sane. It's amazing. Um, and yeah, it feels like the bacteria are more balanced there. So the symptoms of that behavior are actually coming from those bacteria that are present and the cravings too. If so, my mentor, Mary Reddick, I loved when she taught this to me that if you have cravings for protein or fat, those are healthy. Those are healthy cells that are built. All of our cells are built from protein and fat. So it's very healthy for us to have those cravings. For starchy, crispy, crunchy cravings, especially for the first 6 months to a year of starting any kind of health thing, those are your gut bugs talking. They really love the crispy crunchy because the gut lining is very tender and it's a single cell, wall between us, our bloodstream and the outside world. And those cells, if they're not healthy, they're shriveled up, and those opportunistic bacteria, they live in the cracks. And so crispy, crunchy food coming in is going to keep that. It's like sandpaper,
Mm,
continuing to injure that gut lining.
right.
So I also do think like it's at a certain point we need to have chewing. We need to be chewing because that's a really important um, process that we do to produce the enzymes, and it's like good for airway support holistically. Like if you're not strengthening these jaw muscles, that's going to impact your airway and breathing. So, there's a balance of, for a period of time, we need soft cooked foods for the gut lining, and then we need to build up like our jaw muscles.
Mhm.
And like later on, it's a strategy of, a step-by-step approach.
And before we pivot away, you brought up Mary Ruddick, and I love Mary. She's the one who in the beginning of my dietary transition, like I had tried it all as well. I had tried carnivore before I did medical medium is where I completely messed up my gut and my blood sugar dysregulation was out of control. So when you mentioned being a vegan, I was like just remembering that time period. So when I met Mary, and I basically shaved off all of those fruits that I had been consuming that I think it was like a heavy metal detox smoothie that I had religiously every day, but it was blueberries. I had a lot of celery juice, and that was triggering these oxalate issues. So lots of problems. But I really love Mary and the way she put everything succinctly in a nice program to help people. Like some people really need that structure to really commit, and then once they see the transition within a couple of months, or maybe sometimes it could take 5 or 6 months before you really notice it, you
Mhm.
just stick to that path. So I appreciate you. And I know you've learned a lot from her and you kind of integrate some of those philosophies too.
Yes, yeah, I was lucky because so I studied from the NTA, as a functional nutrition therapy practitioner, and then I worked in a functional clinic for 3 years, functional medicine clinic, and so I learned a lot of the functional stuff, right? And so yeah, I love that we talked a lot about ancestral, but I love functional medicine and the testing, and but I'm always thinking like, what's going to be really worthwhile for our clients, like the process, like how can we simplify this more for everybody, because there's so much information out there, it gets overwhelming, and then people don't make the steps that they need to take, the steps that they need to make. And
Yeah.
so actually after I finished there, I was like, I had worked with all these different diets, like the low FODMAP diet, low histamine diet, and I just was trying to integrate them with GAPS. And then I learned about Mary Ruddick, and I did a mentorship program with her, and I ended up actually working with a lot of her clients. She was traveling a lot at the time. And yeah, so I met with her weekly for 2 years, and getting to just download so much of, yeah, and it was very cohesive also with what I had already started to do, but she had already, it's so cool when you see someone who's 10 years ahead of you and it's pieced together something similar to what you were trying to do.
Hmm.
And so her work has been very instrumental for me too, and helped me help so many more people. Yeah. So I'm glad that we got to talk about how we all appreciate her work. And that's amazing that you did you do work with her as a client as well?
Yes, I was a client of hers. I guess it was several years ago. Um, Yeah, and I had already been on my healing journey for 2 or 3 years prior to working with her. So I had made
Yeah.
incremental shifts, but I just didn't realize that I had an oxalate intolerance and that I did not know the
Mhm.
microbiome was as, say, messed up as it was. That's for lack of a better term. So with Mary's protocols, I was able to do the elimination part, and I think that was key to
Mhm.
helping me understand what was setting off those flares. But then
Mhm.
I dug into functional diagnostic nutrition where we do all the functional testing. And that's where I kind of pieced together my own healing protocol. And I've worked with clients with implant illness again. And what we were talking about earlier about the GI map and the stool testing and all of that, like to fill in where all the supports that we're needing because we've been chronically ill for so long.
Yeah, of course. Yes. That we want to make sure we're always getting to the root for people, and actually multiple roots, right? It's not
Right.
just one.
Yeah.
The microbiome is a huge one. And yeah, and we had Dr. Neil Nathan on on our podcast, and I've been seeing so many more people with Lyme and
Mm.
mold toxicity, that these are huge roots that need to be addressed actually. And sometimes simultaneously with, like a gut healing protocol, and nutrition always is a foundation though. Like if you are confused about anything, which doctor to go see, if you have any of these, infections or something like that, don't worry about that as much if you haven't done the foundations of
Yeah.
changing diet, right? Like that is really the foundation, and everything else fits into that really nice.
Absolutely. Yeah, some people get caught up chasing the diagnosis, but really, if you work on those foundations, like you just said, working on those foundations, and I know one of them for you is neuroplasticity, like the mindfulness component. So briefly, I know we want to be respectful of the time, but that's such a big piece. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things too with the nervous system, so because I had experienced trauma as a kid, I think it made sense that like that HPA axis was really dysregulated. It's very common with so much of anyone with capital T trauma, but also small
Mm.
t trauma, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's becoming such a buzzword, but nervous system regulation is such a buzzword, right? But the things that really have been helpful to me have been somatic, an integration, I guess, of somatic work, which I guess can incorporate breath work, but breath work can be its own thing as well. And then meditation, as well as like limbic work, right? So, gratitude journaling has been huge for me. But that trifecta of the limbic experience, like limbic practices, which have really just it's kind of a visualization practice. It's a step beyond meditation because you are actively and engaged with your, it's almost a combination of manifestation and visualization. You're like engaged in creating your new future together or with yourself, right?
Yes.
But because of trauma, and I see so many people in my practice who have a hard time getting into a centered, calm, self-led space or energy that they can even do some of those things in the first place and engage with somatic, breath work or and even like do the gratitude journaling or slow down enough. Like anytime they slow down, they just feel they're like consumed by whatever it is that they're dealing with. So, and a lot of it's unprocessed emotion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
for me, journaling has always been a way for me to tap into that. And then through breath work as well, that's a way to release. So you have to tap in and then release. And then, but yeah, the limbic work is actualization, right? Like actually changing the brain. And I use this tool of hypnosis, it's like guided hypnosis that also can work, but it's a little bit more of a, guided approach, not as engaged, but it's also been just as helpful. So that the work of Lacey Phillips by her business is To Be Magnetic. It has been instrumental for me as well. Just her recorded hypnosis tracks that help me I guess, reintegrate and create new neural pathways as
Mm-hmm.
well. Yeah.
I love that breakdown of the limbic system. That's not a term that on my show many of the practitioners have used, but as you said, it's a component that really aids to shift that mindset. And
Yes. Yeah, the limbic system is so overactive for many of us. With the longer you're sick for, the longer you're like scanning your body and looking hyper vigilant to like what's going in your mouth and what's in your environment, and it's all things that in our modern life really we do have to be aware of, I think, to be, as somewhat healthy. Like we all have to have restraint with our diet, and we all have to like be prudent with what we surround ourselves in our environment because we really are a product of our environment. So it makes sense that there's intention there, but at what point is that intention actually stripping away our peace? And at that point, it's not intention anymore because it's just a control mechanism for a perceived safety that's actually stressing our system out.
mm,
So limbic work is essential. And I actually have a great colleague who we both worked with, Mary Courtney Jacobs, who's a limbic coach, and I use her course with a lot of my clients to help them.
okay, yeah, I'm familiar with Courtney as well.
Yeah.
So for the listeners who feel like they've tried everything, right? And do you have any one piece, or maybe two pieces of encouragement or wisdom that you'd like to leave them with?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you don't have to do this alone. And I know it's exhausting, and I know you want to give up sometimes. We've all been there. But do not give up, and it's okay to take your time also. That the things that you need to learn are going to come to you in the time that you need them. And don't be afraid to ask for help. That is something that I wish I had done years ago.
Right. And seeking out the right kind of help.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where can our listeners find you or learn more about your offerings?
Yeah, so if any of the things that I've said resonate with you, I'd love any of you guys listening, I'd love for you all to just join me on my website, nutritionwithconfidence.com. And I also have a podcast. My husband and I, we love to interview different practitioners and different fields, it's called Healing with Confidence Podcast. and just come and join us there. I have a lot of blog articles on the different diets that I use and different ideas that might be helpful and useful to you.
Wonderful. And to our audience, we want you to know you can share this with anyone who might be benefiting. It's always great to spread the knowledge and spread the wisdom because so many people really do need the help in the functional health space for sure. So, Natalie, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time and you sharing all the aspects of how you work with people and also learning a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Dr. Sharita. It's been so nice to talk with you.
Likewise. And thank you to our listeners. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.